Hey there, you're listening to episode 132 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Cody, and I'm here with my co-host and brother, Keelan, as well as our guest co-host, Julie Wilson from Women Doing Well. Today, we're talking to Ruth McKeaney, author of the book Hungry for Home and host of At Home with Ruth McKeaney. Ruth had a successful law career before following God's call to begin flipping homes with her husband. She's passionate about being generous with both home and family and had all sorts of advice on how to do so yourself. Stay tuned to hear what she has to share. Before we get started, we've spent years speaking to and learning from some of the most passionate givers and leaders around the world. We've distilled down some of the most impactful frameworks, strategies, and tools into short weekly emails that leave you with practical ways you can take your generosity journey to the next level. If you're not on the list already, you can sign up for free at finishlinepledge.com. And with that, let's get started. Well, we're thrilled to have Ruth McKeaney joining us today. Ruth, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today.
Oh, I'm so excited and honored. Thank you for asking.
Ruth, kick us off today and tell us a little bit about your background. What was it like growing up, and what was your faith journey like growing up as well?
I grew up all over the country, starting on the West Coast to the East Coast to the middle of the country. But heritage-wise, I'm from a family steeped in evangelism and missionaries. So family's been all over the world for generations. I mean, I don't know a time when I didn't know the Lord. I mean, it's been part of my story all along. My grandfather and Billy Graham and my great uncle and two other gentlemen met in a Bible study for years together in California before BGA became about. And out of those 5 men were birthed Navigators, Youth for Christ, World Vision, and BGA.
Wow.
I mean, it was big. And my grandfather kind of took all of basically Asia. He did all of, my dad's one of 6. They grew up in Sumatra. My dad grew up in Hong Kong. So everywhere. People hear names like Corrie ten Boom, and she and my grandmother and great-grandmother were best friends. So having people through my home growing up was formative for me. So I think that probably if I had to go back to anything that tethered me to the word home, it would be that.
That is quite a legacy to be building off of. I'm curious, whenever people are coming from such a strong family background of faith, especially going back generations, there comes a time where you have to kind of make it your own, where you're not living off of your family's or your parents' faith and are really kind of stepping into your own relationship. When was that season for you? What did some of that transition look like?
I'll tell you, I would say it was my mid-20s, and it wasn't that my faith wasn't my own before then. It was more that I needed to know the character of God, not just the promises of God. So for me, I was in my mid-20s, and I had said to the Lord, I'm going to walk and pray every day for an hour and just praise you. And it was during a particularly difficult time in our family. My mom had cancer. My brother needed a heart transplant. There were personal issues, and I just needed to know who God was and that he loved me. So that time really changed my relationship to him. It was very personal, and I loved him and I knew he loved me. But it took a year of praise through really dark waters. But I have loved the Lord as long as I can remember. But we went through very difficult times. So maybe that's why my love for the word home means so much to me.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that in your own home, your parents were not followers for a while. Tell us about that transition and what that was like.
Well, you need to understand, my parents were married at 19 and 20, and my mom was at Berkeley, and my dad was in Southern California. So they had joined a commune. I mean, I was 3 and 4 up in Big Bear. They came back to the Lord shortly thereafter. So I don't really remember a time when they weren't believers. But, my dad was in law school and we lived in a tent for a short period of time. So we were constantly moving, constantly reinventing what people would call home. So what strengthened me was the family unit, and the house wasn't the home, it was us. So I think that became part of my story later on.
So, Ruth, given your childhood growing up, moving different places, and the experiences that you just were sharing, how did that influence how you decided to start your career?
Well, my dad was an attorney. So I knew from the time I was in third grade that I was going to be an attorney. In fact, we were moving and I was looking through some boxes and I found a paper I had written in third grade. And I said I was going to be a lawyer and then a judge. So it was something I always knew. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. So I tend to be truth, justice, right, wrong, that kind of personality. I mean, I can tell you, I was getting ready to start law school and I was sitting on my bed, and there have been books written about different people within my family, and people within the family have written books. And I had them all spread out on my bed, and I was just weeping because I felt, look at the heritage. To your point, your earlier question, look at the heritage that I have, and I'm going to be a lawyer. So I called my grandfather. Here is this giant in the faith who just, he was a giant in my life. And I just said, I ask your forgiveness. I'm going to law school. And he said, oh, Ruthie, sweetheart, if you do in the courtroom what I do on the foreign mission field, we're doing exactly the same thing. We're fighting the same enemy. And the Lord's just called us to different mission fields. And it set me free. So from that point on, I think, okay, this is my mission field. I looked at it very differently.
What an empowering statement all at once to just really set your direction and allow you to really step into whatever God was going to bring forward next.
And when you have a history steeped like that, you saw everyone make that choice, right? Foreign mission field, more foreign mission field. So you felt in some way you were letting that down. So he gave me freedom, and it was really wonderful.
Yeah. As you began to step into that career, how did God begin to work through that? And where did you see him planting seeds for things that were going to come later?
I don't know if there were seeds planted at that point in time. Let me rephrase that. I see the seeds now. I would not have seen it then, nor did I see it for the book. I definitely see it for the opportunities the Lord's continue to open, whether it's the show or speaking opportunities, because I became a trial lawyer afterwards. I was an assistant DA for several years, and then I was an assistant attorney general. And when I started that, I couldn't speak in front of 3 people. So what I watched as I look back is the Lord has not wasted one thing that he grew in. So that's been a really sweet thing as I kind of reflect and say, oh my goodness, Lord, here I think I've had to reinvent myself over and over. And you just said, no, I'm designing things and moving things. My purposes are being worked out.
So talk a little bit about meeting Bob and changing careers and focus. What did that look like?
Okay, so I had moved to Richmond and I was turning 30. I had a conversation with the Lord. I know not everyone's going to understand this, but I just said, I'm tired of only dating believers. I feel like I've missionary dated for a while and everyone claims to change and nobody does. And so I'm just going to date. And I met Bob at a party, and I won't go too into the story, but I let him know that certain things wouldn't take place on some dates. And he asked me to dinner one night and he said, do you know why I've asked you here? And I said, no. And he said, because I've never met one of you before. And he said, I'd like to know why you are the way you are. So I didn't preach, but I let him know the reasons and who I was. And we began to date, and I knew very quickly we were going to get serious fast. So I went to basically break up with him. And he came to my apartment one night and he knocked on the door and he said, Ruth, do you know what being reborn is? And I said, I have a general idea. And he said, I've been reborn. He said some men gave his testimony in the office, and he went back to his office and got on his knees and asked the Lord into his heart. It was crazy because one of the deputy attorney generals at the time, who was my boss, was asked by my pastor to mentor Bob. So they began to meet every week. And he's amazing. His gifts of service and loving people has been incredible. So we've had the same goal as far as people since we first were together. So it's been a beautiful thing.
So you never had to tell him that you were that is crazy. And it wasn't your idea for those people to invite him to the.
No, they had been to Promise Keepers, and he had said, "Where were you this weekend?" And they said Promise Keepers. And he was like, "What is that?" And so, you know what? Oh, God is so good. He's so good all the time. And Bob completely changed so radically. And his generosity for people, financially and other ways, blew me out of the water, far more than me. So here I had been concerned that God couldn't bring someone who could lead me that was a new believer. And Bob has led me from day one.
He's such a servant, Ruth. Tell him about when you were having that family reunion and you had this idea, and tell him what he did.
So it's about 150 people were coming for almost a week. And I had said, I'd love to give a gift to everyone. I'd love to give a breadboard. Would you make breadboards? And he said, because to me, the breadboard represents, the gathering of people. It represents, the Lord is the bread of life. I mean, it has so much symbolism. We have a family motto. I wanted that burned into it, which is the word bless. And so he said, well, how many would you like? And I said, well, there's 150 people. Let's say most of them are couples, so maybe 75. And he was like, you want me to make from scratch 75 breadboards? And he proceeded to do that. So that man, there's no one like him.
Well, Ruth, you've talked about this concept of why home is so important to you and how it's not a building. It's so much deeper than that. What kind of elements to you define what it means to be home?
I mentioned Bob Metcalf, who was my deputy attorney general. He and his wife took us out to dinner one evening as we were getting married. And they said, can we give you guys some counsel? And we said, sure. And they said, have a mission statement for you and Bob, and then as a family, defining who you are, who you want to become, what you value. So I think those things determine home. Play hard, work hard, generosity, others first. So those became different touch points for us as a family. My family growing up was very similar. I mean, by the time I was married at 30, I think I'd moved 23 times. So for me,
wow,
having stability, and I'll give you one other example. I had several friends, I was in fourth grade, and several friends' parents were getting divorced. And I heard my parents arguing, and I started crying, and I said, are you getting divorced? And my mom took me into this side room. She didn't have an engagement ring, no diamond. They had no money. And she had this band. She takes it off, and inside is a triangle. And she said, this represents the Lord and the Father and I. You never have to worry about that. That, to me, became my stability and my home because I didn't have place. We had a lot of illness. My dad was also in the middle of a lawsuit for 5 years where my family lost everything. So knowing that the family and the unit was that home was what tethered me to the rock, so to speak. And when she died, so she died at my age, and I was the oldest of 6, and she called each one of us into her room when she was dying. And she said, if you could have anything to mind, what would it be? And I said, your wedding band. And I'm the only one that asked for it, and I'm the one that got it. But again, because it represented home.
Yeah, what a powerful story of really the foundation of a family culture that has obviously permeated so much of what has transpired afterwards. I'm curious, I know you had quite a significant career in law, and then you made some pretty big pivots throughout the years after that. Can you walk us through some of how that came about and also what some of those transitions were like?
Absolutely. So I get married. I'm 30 years old. We got married shortly after Bob came to the Lord. And about 2 months after we were married, he came to me and said, would you mind moving to Philadelphia? My dad wants me to come work for him. Now, I was on track. I really wanted to be a judge. I was at the Attorney General's office in Richmond. And my mentor at the time was a Court of Appeals judge who then became a Virginia Supreme Court judge. So he takes me to lunch. And we're sitting at this table, and he throws out the Newsweek magazine. And on the cover of the magazine was family businesses passing by, generationally, and their failure rate. And he says to me, does your husband know what you're giving up? And do you know what you're walking into? And I said, oh, there is nothing to worry about. I've always known I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom. It's just the next step. And that same couple that had taken us out to talk to us about defining who we wanted to become as a family and as a couple, they said, Ruth's going to have a major identity crisis. And so Bob gets home from that breakfast with Bob and Elaine, and he repeats what they said. And we both started laughing and said, oh, what are you talking about? You've been the oldest of 6. We've always known you're going to be a stay-at-home mom. This is going to be a piece of cake. Well, I quit work. We moved to Philadelphia. I'm waiting to wave into the bar, because I had practiced long enough to wave into the bar, but it takes a significant amount of time. And in that first year, we lived in 9 different places because our home in Richmond had.
Wow.
So we stayed in strangers' places. We house sat. We stayed in my in-laws. I mean, we were everywhere. And there were some tough things going on with my in-laws at that time. And I walked into a field near their home and I screamed at the top of my lungs, Lord, can you see me? Because it was the first time where my identity, I realized it wasn't being a daughter of Christ. It was what I had done for a living for so long. And Bob used to joke, oh, when I lived in Richmond, I was Ruth's husband. And now she's my wife. And that shift, especially when I wasn't working or I was just doing odd jobs, it was brutal. So I got pregnant that year. We lived in 9 places. And I started to attend a Bible study called CBS, Community Bible Study. And I came home one day and I said, oh, Bob, I found where I want us to live. It's something called the Main Line. So we go and we meet with a realtor. Her name is Bibi Forrester. And she asked us how much we can spend. And we told her and she burst out laughing. And she said, you can't live here. 2 weeks later, she calls us and said, are you afraid of hard work? We're like, no, of course not. So she takes us to this little 150-year-old house, sliding off the foundation, 1 bathroom. Do you remember the movie The Philadelphia Story?
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Montgomery Scott Estate. And they had 6 tiny homes that their help used to live in. And it was one of those houses. So we go in, and when I tell you, it was a disaster. I mean, it was horrendous. And I, at that point, had just had a baby. And we went to this little diner, and Bob said, let's learn. Let's go to Home Depot. And meanwhile, he's working full time. I'm living in New Jersey at a cousin's house. He's driving back and forth to Pennsylvania every single night. And we redid the house. And 18 months later, the realtor came to us and said, I can double your money. And I have another house for you. And we proceeded to do it every 18 months for 16 years.
Wow.
And we had 5 children, and all 5 were born in different homes.
Yeah, it was really poignant to me when you told me how you handled doing dishes. Tell us about that.
Well, it's one of those things where, people think, oh, yeah, redoing a house. When you're doing the work yourself and you're living there, it is a whole nother ballgame. I mean, whoever took a shower had to wash the dishes in the bathtub before they could take the shower because we would not have kitchens. I mean, when I tell you, there was one point where I had 2 kids at the time, and they were both, we had the first 4 babies in 5 years. So when I tell you, and then my 5th was born 3 years later, when I tell you we were under it, we had no money, and we were doing the work 24/7 with my husband working a full-time job and me with 4 children under 5. And we took the kids to the doctor's office, and they took their blood tests, and their lead levels were so high. We didn't realize all these old houses, the paint's lead.
Yeah.
Have toddlers who are, all over the place. So they're like, we're going to have to call social services if you can't get rid of the lead in your houses. So we've had every kind of experience you can imagine when it comes to that.
You watch these home renovation shows on TV now, and that is not what you had. There wasn't.
Oh, they're all in a crew as soon as you walk out that door. But I tell you, there are no words. I didn't have a creative bone in my body. I didn't think. And, it's one of those things where we were forced to do it, and we did it.
So I'm curious, because it sounds like a lot of this period coincided with building your family, and you're coming from this really strong family culture. Obviously, you and Bob had set some of the foundation of your marriage, but as you start to branch out into a larger family, how did you see some of that culture start to either change or maybe just solidify from what you had already started with?
I talk a lot about creating intentional family culture and what does that mean? Because so many people are like, I don't have a family culture. Well, every single person does. The question is, are you going to be intentional about creating it or not? And I think once we knew who we wanted to become, what we wanted our value system to be, we started to put those building blocks in place. Take, for instance, my dad read to us my whole life out loud. And we started that with the kids when they were young. We really wanted a strong work ethic with kids. So we started to implement, they started to help us with the houses. But if we were going to work hard, we also wanted to play hard. And what did that look like? So there was lots of camping trips. So I think we just had to be incredibly intentional that our house flipping didn't cost us our family. And at one point, people have asked us about our marriage. In fact, we've recently done a little episode on our marriage and flipping and how did you do it? How did you come out stronger on the other side? And I remember at the very beginning, when I tell you we didn't have money, we couldn't even go to a Starbucks. And so we would go to Barnes and Noble because you can get their free magazines next to their coffee shop. I mean, they aren't free magazines, but you can take them off the shelf and look at them and then put them back. So we would sit at our table and he would have a yellow legal pad of paper. I would have one, and we'd go through magazines and we would write down what we were wanting to do in that house. What was a no compromise for me and what was for him, what were things that didn't matter to me, and vice versa. So that when we started a project, we were on the same page from the very first day. You're making hundreds of decisions all the time. And I watch friends walk through that process, and it's brutal. So when you're not only having children, you're moving, and you have very little money or margin, those are three of the top stressors there are. And so if you are intentional about how do you walk through that in a way that honors the other person and celebrates what they love, you're going to be in trouble. So I think we put the building blocks in very quickly. I mean, I have a workaholic husband. If I didn't say to him, Bob, when you come home before those kids go to bed in 3 hours, it is family time every night, he could have gone and worked all night. So that's what I kind of meant about the intentional aspect of it. And then Julie and I have talked about this before, the importance of family traditions and what those look like for your family.
And I just have to give a plug for your book because it has freed me. I had a mother who was the most amazing homemaker. I mean, many of my friends, when she died, letters they wrote me were so special, but I had no idea that they had learned how to set a table, how to fold a bathroom towel like the hotel. I mean, I took that for granted growing up. But the one thing I'll tell you, it was perfection. So I was like, I'm never going to be able to do this. But it was your book that made me realize that I don't have to live up to that standard. Her standard was amazing, and I got so much benefit out of it. I'm just not that person. But in your book, I was like, oh, I can create family traditions that are doable for me. I can't maybe do 2 Christmas meals. She would do one at lunch and then she'd do a dinner. And I get exhausted after one meal, but I love doing little treasure hunts or scavenger hunts. And I just love to have fun, but it's more simple than complicated. So it just freed me to hear your story and to be invited because you never did anything that was unattainable. And you never put the pressure in your book on me as a reader to do it the way you were doing it. It was like an invitation to do it the way God had me to do it.
And I wouldn't say that I was always like that because I am a type A person. So if it wasn't beautiful or if the house wasn't clean, there was that pressure. And my mom, I remember her saying when I was newly married, it's not about performance or perfection. It's about loving people well. And I remember one of my little younger cousins, she was early 20s, walked into my kitchen and opened one of my drawers, and my drawer was a mess. And she was like, oh, now I'm at home. And I thought, isn't that true? Are we more comfortable walking to someone's house where we can put our feet up on that couch and let our messes out? Or do we have to look as imperfect as the house we're in? And I think it was so important for me to learn that. I mean, when Bob and I got married, he used to have cereal at night for dinner. I did not cook. And part of it was, he was like, I like cereal, so give me my favorite cereals, When I tell you, I didn't know how to do any of these things. I didn't know how to do any things. And it was because we had to. And then I began to take my position very seriously. Like, okay, if this is what the Lord has given to me at this point in time, I want to do it well. And I don't want to begrudge my children, who I wouldn't say I'm a great toddler mom or a young child. I love teenagers. So those young years when we're working all the time and moving every year and a half were hard. So creating things that knit us together as a family were really important.
Ruth, there's a particular scripture that comes to mind as I'm hearing you describe these years where you're trying to explore your identity. You're moving away from a career that you were successful in. You're in a new geography. You're moving around in that first year looking for that first place to call home, and then several places to call home over the subsequent years, and learning what it is to have a growing family. Psalm 57 says, "In you, my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings, I will take refuge." I'm just curious how this concept of being at home in the Lord during this season sustained you.
I think it was the only thing that sustained me. Although I probably would have told you then I wasn't being sustained. Does that make any sense? Sometimes when you're in the place, you don't know it. But in hindsight, you're like, oh, that's how I got.
It's like that Footprints poem.
Yes.
Yep.
And I just, Bob and I have often said, if we had known what we know now, would we have attempted all that we attempted? And I can tell you, he carried all of us all the way through it, even though we didn't know we were being carried. We laughed. We just told this story. We were in the middle of selling one house, but we had purchased the other one before that one had closed, and it was 2008. So I'm just giving you time, okay? We had $300 to our name. And Bob goes to meet me at Costco. He had taken, I think we had 4 little girls at the time. He had taken them to McDonald's. He had left his wallet. He gets to Costco. I said, where's the $300? That's what we're going to grocery shop with. And he was like, I left it. So he goes back to McDonald's. It's been stolen. So he goes to the manager, and the manager said, someone turns in your wallet. It's empty. He comes back to Costco, and I said, I was a DA. Get back there. There's got to be a camera. He goes back to McDonald's, and the police came and looked at the camera. It was the manager that stole the money. Anyway, my point is, we never should have been able to do what we did in a million years. And not only did he knit Bob and I closer in a 16 years is a long time to do this with 5 children. So our family loves each other so deeply. My eldest daughter just redid a whole home that she bought while in college, and she did it with my husband. So when I've seen the Lord and all that he instilled in all of them, I mean, it was formative. So I watch them. They work hard, they play hard, and they love hard. And I'm thinking, okay, we've been doing our job, okay. But God's grace, we've been doing our job.
So there's 2 kind of themes that have been really consistent up to this point in your life. There's the theme of family and culture, and you started right off the bat with that. The heart of a home is the family. It doesn't even really matter where you are. But then there's also the home as in the building. That's what, you're kind of doing as a career at this point, working through different homes. As you blend the 2 of those together, then you start to have this beautiful generosity of home and of family as that central nucleus starts to spread out to others outside of your family in hospitality and in just loving others well. And I know that's a big part of your story. Over these years, or in the years afterwards, how did you see God creating opportunities for you to just love others well in how you stewarded your family and your home during these years?
There were years when we had company more during that year than we didn't. So more than 180 days of people staying, whether it was family members or friends. So my children have really grown up with that being a part of their daily life. It isn't just, once a month, oh, can friends come over? It literally was day in and day out, and it was them participating in the serving. You know, growing up, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, we're having all these missionaries through our house. We're doing such a good job getting them sabbatical and rest. And yet it was so formative for us having them. So when I knew that as an adult, it was so important that my children do the same thing. And I remember my dad saying to us, don't let children's friends, their peers, raise them. So even having them around adults all the time and caring for them and meeting their needs, I just watched them mature and grow completely different than so many other the kids have. So I think that's why we ended up on the house that we're at, which is a farm, and we built a barn so that we could entertain a lot, where we could have, you know, all of their young life friends or their school friends or, you know, entertaining a lot. It's done simply and it's been done big, both. They don't ask a question. They know it needs to be done. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a little example. We were throwing, my son just turned 16 and he's in 10th grade, and we had to do his Christmas banquet. And his sisters now are out of the house. 2 are just recently married and 2 are in college. And I thought, this is going to be interesting. I leaned on the girls when it came to entertaining, but not Anders necessarily. And there were about 100 people coming over, and it was me. My husband was out of town. And I'm in the barn talking to some parents, and I'm watching Anders stand at the barn doors, shaking every hand, welcoming every person. What can I give you? Can I get you a drink? And the minute his date's parents walked in, he was like, Mom, I'll be right back. He went straight over. How can I help you? Thank you so much for letting me take your daughter. It was, I mean, I wanted to like jump for joy. It was such a really sweet thing, because I can't think of, I mean, we hold that is so valued in our house. We've got the word bless imprinted in our sport court. My great grandfather used to make these plaques. And so 2 words we adopted is together and bless. We have it everywhere. So to watch them live it out has been really beautiful.
And obviously such a strong example for them to just, you know, kind of naturally embody that. I'm curious, because I feel like you have a really strong experience in this compared to a lot of people. For somebody that wants to be more generous with their family and their home, which is, I'd say, a major challenge for a lot of people, how would somebody even start to go about that? You know, you're talking about having people over more than half of the year. I think there's a lot of people who are talking like a day or 2 a year, you know, and that feels like a stretch already. They're worried about that day well in advance. So how do you start to build that muscle? And what are just some practical things that help to build that capacity and to do it well?
You know, I was just looking before you called. My great grandfather, they made these bless cards, okay? And on the back, part of the definition that he gives is to have a home, a shelter home, wherein a stranger passing the night with us would depart in the morning blessed, and to have that Abrahamic heritage that my children looking back will bless us and then carry the word on to 1,000 generations. That, I say, is what the Lord invested in the word bless. I often think, you know how they say obedience precedes the desire? I think you don't understand the blessing you receive from blessing others until you're obedient to begin.
Mm-hmm.
You don't necessarily have the desire to do it. I don't necessarily always have the desire. When someone stops in and I'm like, oh, okay. You don't, until they walk out the door and you realize, wow, they just blessed you. And so I think I would say, you know, to your point of building the muscle, it is building a muscle. And it is saying, okay, who do I know? What widow do I know? What single parent do I know? Who am I not even recognizing is lonely? And, you know, we've even prayed that as a family, like, Lord, show us who's lonely at school that I'm completely unaware of. Julie can tell you this. In my cookbook, I have Ruth's Barely Baked Chocolate Cookies. And I have hundreds of these dough balls in my freezer, because at any time someone might show up and I can easily do freshly baked cookies. So even just having those things, I mean, I had a grandmother contact me that she didn't know how to talk to her neighbors until she started to make my cookies and give them out to the kids in the neighborhood. And now everyone comes to her house. And so I think it's just literally saying, Lord, I don't desire it. I'm asking you to give me an opportunity and show me how to grow the muscle, because it's not necessarily going to be something you enjoy.
And then buy her book, because it'll tell you exactly ideas. Like my daughter, the cookies are so much part of what we've done at her school that they're requested. And then when I asked her this past year what she wanted to do for her birthday, she said, I want to have a Ruth's Hungry for Home birthday. I said, what does that mean? She said, well, I want you to make the ribs, and I want you to make the cookies.
Like, made me cry when you told me that, Julie. I was like, oh my goodness.
And it was so sweet because she's learning through my mother's heritage, but then through just the freedom I've had to make it my own, to say, okay, Lord, how have you made me? What are our family traditions? What will be our legacy?
Yeah.
And it is so freeing to not have the performance and the pressure that can sometimes come with being hospitable. You know, I also have let go of having a clean house. When you have a teenager and 2 working parents, your house isn't always perfectly neat. And it is so freeing to just be able to be, come on in. Sorry about the mess, but I do think it frees people.
Yeah, it is interesting. And Julie, you know this. I lived in Richmond when I worked at the Attorney General's office, and we have a lot of the same friends. And they used to throw dinner parties where you received invitations in the mail ahead of time. It was a serious thing. And so that was daunting for me, because I thought, I don't cook. Like, I had to grow this muscle myself. And part of the reason I wanted it was for my children.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to come back for a second to what she was talking about just having these dough balls for cookies in the fridge ready to go. What I love about that is that is planning for the unexpected in order to be hospitable. Like, we hear people talk about like a giving slush fund or a spontaneous kind of giving budget, in the same kind of idea about like just having something set aside, and you're like, I am ready for whatever God's going to drop into our lap. I'm curious, because I'm sure you're just chock full of these kind of things. What are your top 5 simple little things you could do to just be open and prepared for God to drop something into your lap like that?
I'll tell you a funny little story. I was out with my family. I think we were at a rugby game or something, and I get a call, and it's my cousin on the phone. And she said, wow, this is really good. My cousin lived in New York. I said, what's really good? And she said, oh, these chocolate chip cookie dough balls I just put in the oven. And I said, oh, do you do those too? And she said, no, I brought the whole soccer team to your house from New York, and we're at your house. And I knew what it was. So it's just a funny thing that when there's just an openness to be ready, you know, when I have people stay with me, I try to find out ahead of time their favorites. I try to put a basket together of needs to let them know they were thought of before they got there. There was a time when I even tried to have like their name put on a little bag and I don't always have time to do things like that, but anything that makes people feel like they can rest and be vulnerable, to me, you've hit it out of the park. I never want someone to feel like they are a guest. I want them to feel like they're part of our family. And I think a lot of my book has to do with that.
Ruth, I think there's so much truth to what you're saying. My wife and I moved just a few months ago, and we were in that house for 5 years, and we knew a couple of our neighbors, and maybe one of our neighbors had ever been inside our house. But we loved to have people over. It was just, there was some disconnect. We were not very intentional about it. Mm-hmm. And so when we moved, we talked to each other and said, how do we set the tone better this time around? And we were busy moving. So my mom actually helped bake banana bread. She said, how many people live on your street? And I think it was 13 or 14 houses on our street. And that week we went around, and every day after work, we'd go over and deliver as many as we could. And we got to step into the homes, into the lives of most of our neighbors. And there was one night where it was raining and the power went out, and my wife was like, we don't need to go tonight. I said, we should go. And this woman invited us in, and she had a lantern, and we sat with her for almost an hour. And a couple Saturdays later, we had a warm day, and 3 different neighbors came over and gathered in our driveway, and they were talking about the house and the people who used to live there. And one of them had a fruitcake, and one of them had a hummingbird feeder because we talked about how much we like the outdoors. And it was like, we're home. This is what our souls wanted. And it's not the building.
You know, it's interesting that you say that story because we live in an area where people want their privacy. And it's clear, whether it's the gates, whatever it is, they want their privacy. And when we moved into our house, we didn't have anybody come meet us. Now, we're in a 305-year-old farmhouse now that looked like it was haunted. And what Bob and I did before anything else, we had Krispy Kreme and donuts, and we put notes in everyone's mailboxes and said, we'd like you to come on Saturday morning for Krispy Kremes and donuts. And all the neighbors came, and that's how we met them. But it's like, they don't know how thirsty they are for it until you show them.
It's like someone has to start it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just takes on a life of its own. And for me, one of the things that your book did is you every Christmas make some toffees. Is that right? Some kind of English toffee. And I thought, I'm not very good at that. But I have gotten a lot of compliments on my pimento cheese. So I said, honey, why don't we make pimento cheese? Because it's just, everybody's entertaining at Christmas. We could just drop it off. They can, use it then or use it in a couple days. And people are like, pimento cheese is coming, right? I'm like, yep, pimento cheese is coming. And it's become a family tradition. We all make it together. Ella's now making little cards that are pretty, but it came because you have to, there's nothing new under the sun. We get ideas from each other.
So what she's saying is my husband and I, my great aunt, who was a cook for Ronald Reagan when he was governor, she has some amazing recipes. And one of them is this English toffee. It's called almond roca. And Bob and I, we started doing it before we were married. So 26 years have made this together, and we hand it out to everyone we know. And then Christmas Eve, we've done this since we first got married. We make about 400 cinnamon rolls, and Christmas Eve, we deliver them to all these different families around the city. So my kids have grown up. Everyone else is going to church Christmas Eve, but we're out delivering cinnamon rolls that people get to let rise overnight and bake on Christmas morning. So, but again, it goes to, that's a family tradition. Like, if I even thought that wouldn't happen, my children would lose it. So it's kind of, yeah.
I'm curious if you have any stories of a period or season where you have this passion for hospitality, for loving others really well, but sometimes life happens also, and it just gets really hard to think outwardly. It's really easy to kind of just be focused on just getting through the day. Have there been any seasons like that you really had to kind of stretch yourself to continue to show hospitality, or a lot of these kind of outward, generous expressions of love for others that you've pushed through and seen God really come through?
I think I probably went through many times where it was even hard to show my children hospitality. So, you are really tight. And, I hear moms of like one baby, and they live in the same house for years, and let's all take them a meal. And I'm like, are you kidding? And I don't mean to say that, but like, it was exhaustion. But once you saw that it fed your soul as well, and I'm an introvert, so I need, after a lot, in fact, my dad, he moved into one of our guest cottages years ago, and he told me after he had lived here for a little bit, he said, I've just realized you're an introvert. You actually need quiet. And I've only always seen you in your entertaining space where you're just taking care of everybody there, and you actually go dark for a while. So I think for me, it's just pushing through.
Ruth, you've also went through a season around the time that we connected when your kids were older, you kind of gotten good at things, and you and your uncle had a conversation. I'd love you to share a little bit about that.
My oldest daughter had left for college, and it was, it's kind of like that first identity shift where I stayed home from work and became a stay-at-home wife. It wasn't even mom at the time. And your identity is taking a major hit. It was happening for the second time. And I like to say it was like the tectonic plates were moving underneath. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, I'm going to have more of my life after these kids leave than I even had with them under my roof. You don't think that way. when you're raising kids. You think they're going to be there forever. And all of a sudden I thought, who am I going to be? I haven't kept up with my CLEs, all my continuing legal education. I'm not going to go be a trial lawyer again. I haven't practiced in 18 years, and I'm not going to go work at J. Crew. Like all of a sudden, all these things are really hitting hard. And the other thing was, I would never have said that my identity had become my kids. And all of a sudden, I began to feel like my purpose was walking out the door. And that is a really hard place to be for a mom, especially when you know better. And you had no idea that was creeping up on you at all. I mean, people would have said, you're accomplished. You've done that. No, the identity had become those children. So I was really struggling with it at the time. And my Uncle Hubert was visiting, and he was sitting in my living room, and he said, Ruthie, I was in the kitchen at the time. He said, Ruthie, come join me in the living room. And I sit next to him, and he said, can I ask you a very personal question? I said, sure, Uncle Hubert. He said, okay, it's going to be a hard personal question. He said, what are you 100% depending on the Lord for right now? And I said, besides raising my 5 kids? He said, yes. I said, nothing. He said, I know. He said, you and Bob have become so good at what you do that there's no room for you to see God work and him get the glory, not you and Bob. Well, that kind of hit me a little hard, because isn't that what we're all aspiring to? Where we reach that point where we're smooth sailing? You know what I'm saying? And I thought, I kind of like this spot. And he said, may I challenge you? And I said, sure. He said, ask the Lord to give you a vision beyond your resources, beyond your financial means, your personal capital, and your education. So you get to see him work and get the glory, not you and Bob. So beyond your money, the people you know, and what you know. So I began to pray this every day. And he knew I'm the kind of person that says, okay, I'll take on any challenge. So I actually began to ask the Lord, okay, show me. And the Lord and I have had these, let me back up. I was in an argument once with my mom. We're on the phone, and she said, Ruthie, honey, you don't see your sin. I mean, I was 30 at the time, and I was complaining about my sister or something. And she said, you don't see your own sin. I said, because I don't sin. I didn't mean I don't sin. I meant I'm always trying to do the right thing. So she said, I have a challenge for you. Ask the Lord to show you your sin. Mm-hmm. So I hang up with my mom. I'm driving on Kelly Drive in Philadelphia. I remember exactly where I was. This is 20 years ago. And I said, Lord, I give you 6 months to show me my sin. Do you know, for 6 months, I couldn't think a thought that didn't see the sin in my motivation or my heart. I remember at the end of those 6 months getting on my knees saying, is there anything that you actually love about me? My point being is, I've asked the Lord these things, and he's been faithful to show me. So I'm beginning to pray this prayer. And I go to a Women Doing Well event up in Connecticut. And I'm sitting at a table. Julie, were you at our table, or were you across the room? I can't remember.
No, I wasn't there that night. I couldn't make the Philly vision time. So I just hear the stories, and they make me sit. I just love it.
So I'm sitting, Sally Lloyd Jones, who's now one of my very dear friends, and all these very accomplished women. And here I am, a stay-at-home mom, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, what the heck am I doing here? And there's a panel of women up at the front of the room, and they're talking about your purpose, your passion, and God's plan for you. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And one of the women said on the panel, I think she was a CEO of a big company, and she was leaving that position to go into ministry. And she said, I can do a spreadsheet in my sleep. I don't even know how to make a charcuterie board. And I get in the car driving home with my best friend, and I'm in tears. And she said, what's wrong? And I said, I don't know what I'm passionate about outside of my family and blessing people in our home. But what would God do with that? I don't know my purpose anymore, and I definitely don't have a plan. And she started laughing, and she jabbed me in my side and said, well, at least you know how to make a charcuterie board. And so if you ever see my book, when you open it, actually I have one right here. If you open it, the first thing you will see is a charcuterie board. So we get home, and maybe 2 months later, and I'm praying this daily, I go down to another friend of ours, Wendy Rogers, was speaking at a Women of Legacy conference at the Museum of the Bible. And she says to me, hey, we're staying at the Trump Hotel. Come stay with me. You could use a night off. And, it was with an echelon of women that I had no business being at that event. And his legacy of financial means. And So I stay with Wendy, or I get to the hotel. I'm in flip-flops, ripped jeans, tank top. I race into the hotel, which is very classy and beautiful. And I see all my friends. Sally's there, some other people, and there's an empty seat next to someone. And I sit down and I'm like, what am I doing here? And I begin to talk to the woman next to me, who's a very beautiful, regal, like 5'11", blonde, and we start to talk. And we're talking about flipping houses, and she starts to cry. And she said, "You're my divine appointment." I said, "For what?" She said, "I asked the Lord. I had to have a divine appointment. You're it." She goes and she gets a drink. While she's gone, one of the women leaned over and said, "Do you know who that is?" And I said, "No." She said, "Sarah Perot." I said, "It's not ringing any bells." She said, "Ross Perot's daughter-in-law." So Sarah comes back over, and I see her a few more times during that conference, but nothing of, real significance. And about a month later, I'm hosting a wedding of about 300 people at my house, and I get chronic migraines. So I'm laying on my kitchen floor, and my husband's rubbing my head, and my phone starts to beep. And I said, "Who is it?" He said, "Sarah Perot." I said, "What does she want?" She said, "She wants me in London tomorrow." I was like, "I don't go to London next week, let alone tomorrow." And he said, "You haven't prayed about this." And I said, "Because I'm not going." And he said, "Let's pray." So he's rubbing my head and he prays. And her next message was, "I'm bringing you here. You're coming tomorrow. I'm throwing a party." So I said, "I can't come tomorrow. I'll come the next day." I flew on Tuesday. I was picked up by a special driver. And he says, "Oh, you missed her party at the Buck." I said, "What Buck? What's the Buck?" And he said, "The Buckingham Palace." And I said, "Nobody told me it was the Buckingham Palace." I get to her house, and Sally's there as well. And we spent all week together. And on our last day, Sarah takes us to her favorite. She said, "I want to take you to my favorite farm for lunch." So we go to this farm, and during lunch, she was asking me, she asked Sarah and Sally, but Sarah asked, "Why do you bother unpacking when you're going to move in 18 months?" I said, "Everyone's hungry for home." Well, they both pick up their computers at the same time. And Sally says to Sarah, "It hasn't been taken." And I said, "What hasn't been taken?" She said, "The name." I said, "For what?" They said, "The book you're supposed to write." I said, "Oh, no. I will never write a book. If there is something I can honestly say never, that is what I would never do." And they kept bothering me the whole time. "No, you're supposed to be writing. You're supposed to write about the family and your history." And I said, "No." And I get home, and my sister lives in one of our guest houses. And she walked over and said, "How was your time?" And I said, "Oh, you're going to laugh. They think I need to write a book." And she starts crying, and she says, "You're supposed to write a book." Are you familiar with Bethel?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Bill Johnson and my dad are cousins. So we're cousins. So when I tell you we are like immersed all over. So my sister had been teaching ballet there for 2 decades. But my sister, she will say, "No, this is what you're supposed to do." And I tend to be like, "Let me pray about that. I'm just much more, and it's just the way I'm wired, where I just need to test things for a while." And I said, "No, I'm not going to do it." And she said, "Will you at least talk to a friend of mine who's written?" And I said, "I'll do that." So I get on a call. Her name's Jessica, and she wants my story. So I give her my story, and she said, "This is bigger than you. May I fly out there next week?" And I said, "I'm not going to write a book." She flies out here the following week, and she talks to my whole family for a few days. And she says at the last evening before she was leaving, "I would like to collaborate with you and write a book." I said, "I'm not going to write a book." So on the last day, she and my sister walk into the living room. This is where it all kind of comes together. And she hands me 2 wrapped presents. And she said, "Your sister and I have been shopping all day for some gifts for you." So she hands me the first one. I unwrap it. It's a teapot from this really cool store called Terrain, which is interesting how that story comes full circle later. But she said, "When you're asking the Lord for that vision beyond your resources, I want you to have a cup of tea." And I said, "Oh, Jess, I don't drink tea and I'm not writing a book." And we're all laughing because it's become a joke at this point, because I seriously was not going to write a book. And she said, "Before you open my last gift, we went to bookstores, home stores, gardening stores, all over town looking because she'd been exposed to so many kinds of books, if I saw a book that looked like something you would put out there, what it would look like. And this is what it is." So I unwrap it, And I'm like, Jess, where is this place? And she's like, I have no idea. We turn to the back of the book. It's the farm outside of London in the Cotswolds that Sarah had taken.
Wow.
The chances of that, let me just tell you, are zero.
Mm-hmm.
And I got on my knees. I was sitting on that same couch I had been with Uncle Hubert. And I said, I'll be obedient, but I don't know what to do. And she put an app on my phone, and every Monday for 6 months, she sent me questions on Monday. And I would talk into my phone, telling stories, answering the questions. It would then transcribe onto her computer, and we would work. And then I had a friend come take 30,000 photos over COVID. And she shrunk those down to about 1,000. And my sister and I cut and pasted on a stack of 300 pieces of paper where we thought pictures should go. I didn't know what I was doing. And then that same friend, Wendy, puts me on a call with the gentleman who wrote Rick Warren, Purpose Driven Life. And he says to me, what's your social media like? And I said, I don't have any. And he said, well, your problem is you're not a household name. You're going to have to self-publish. I said, well, then I'm finished. I'm not self-publishing. So we hang up. It's Labor Day weekend. Bob and I are sitting in my kitchen in these two chairs, and we hang up. And I said, I had stacks of 300 pages with all these taped pictures. And I said, I think we should put these in binders at Christmas and give them to the kids as gifts. And he said, you're not even praying. And I said, Bob, I'm not self-publishing. I wouldn't even know what to do. And I'm not going to schlep my book all over the place begging someone to buy my book. And he said, you're not praying. So we prayed and we finished. And he said, my new paddle partner, which paddles like tennis, from South Africa, I think he just brought a printing company. Let me call him. Michael, do you do books? And Michael's like, I have no idea. He said, let me call you right back. He called us back. He said, we do books. I will do Ruth's book at cost. It will be ready in 6 weeks. Tell her to be in the boardroom on Monday morning. I will have the heads of every department walk her through how to do this. When I tell you I can't take credit for a single thing that has happened in the entire process, I can't take credit. And the amount of faith, and Julie can tell you this, I still struggle. I'm like, he has taken me through 3 years of like amazing things, like a show. I mean, all these things. And I'm like, oh, but is it all done? I really don't know what God had. Like, I literally feel like I'm in the same place as I was years ago. And God's like, no, this whole thing has been about me, Ruth, not about you.
I want to just add one more to this because I think so many women struggle with this. We discredit ourselves for whatever reason. I think it's just part of our sin nature to sort of doubt our dignity and to put ourselves down. Not everyone, but a lot of us. Mm-hmm. I remember calling you and asking you if you'd be on the board for Women Doing Well.
Oh, okay. I'm going to finish that story because you need to know. I get told you need to write a book. I come home. This is the same week. Julie calls me. Would you be on the board of Women Doing Well? I literally look at my phone and I was like, no, I will not be. Why would you ask me to be on the board? No, I will not be on the board of Women Doing Well. I hang up. My dad had, because he lives in one of our cottages, he had come over to my house. I had just gotten back in town from being in England. So he said, let's go get a bite to eat. I want to hear about your trip. We're sitting at dinner. I am weeping. They think I need to write a book. I can't write a book. I have nothing to say. I have nothing to offer anybody anymore. And Julie just called me and asked me to be on the board. I've never been on the board of PTA. Like, I can't be on the board. And my dad goes, that's exactly why you're supposed to do it. What do you think God is trying to do? And I was like, Dad, I am not capable. So Julie calls me back and says, I'd like to ask you again. And I was like, whoa, I need you to stop. Let me tell you who I am not. And I proceed to give Julie a list. I realize I'm a lawyer. I was a criminal lawyer. I don't do business. I don't fundraise. I literally took her through a list of I am nots. Like, these are my disclaimers. And she goes, that's not why we're asking you to be on this board. And I was like, Lord, I can't get away from like every area of my life. I am not capable right now. What is God doing? And it was literally saying, you know what? You can't lean on your own understanding in any of this.
Well, and your 2-word purpose is imparting wisdom.
Yes.
And I remember saying to you, I don't want your law degree. I don't want any of that stuff. Wisdom is your purpose. And I need so much wisdom in this season, Ruth. I need you. And you said, oh, Well, I could do that.
I was feeling so, I mean, when you're a stay-at-home mom for that long, you lose confidence in anything outside of it. And, here I am writing a book on cooking, entertaining, decorating, gardening. I'm not an expert in any of those areas, but I do know how to utilize those things to create home and blessing people. So it's been a journey.
Ruth, you mentioned your book, Hungry for Home, and you mentioned that you have a show. Where can people check out these resources? And I'd also love to hear, what are you most excited about over the next 5 or 10 years?
So I have an Instagram. It's called Hungry for Home, FOR Home. And I do Tip Tuesdays on different family things or cooking, things like that. So that's my Instagram. My book is on my website, www.hungry4home.com. Also, it's on Amazon. And the show, so here's another where the Lord just said, this isn't about you. I got a call, a message left saying, we have a show called Homeworthy and we'd like to come film you. And I very quickly Googled Homeworthy, and they do homes all over the world. I mean, they've done Bunny Williams. I mean, and I called her back and I said, no. I said, I don't know what you know about our home or about me, but like Bob and I used to go to garage sales and estate sales. Like, we've done the work ourselves. I'm not a high designer. And she said, I have your book. That's not why I want to come. I'd like to come interview you. So she did an episode on us and we hit 1 million views. Well, they hadn't had anyone hit 1 million views, and that happened. And then last summer, she called, Allison Kenworthy is her name, the producer, who had been a producer of Good Morning America. And she said, would you be willing to talk with my husband? She said, let me tell you who he is. He's a producer of Disney. So he gets on the phone and he said, do you know Diane Sawyer? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I used to produce her show. She asked me about my wife's new show, and I told her my favorite episode was yours, and I sent her the episode. Can we call you this Christmas and talk to you about possibly doing your own show? So he called me last Christmas, or the two of them did, and said, would you be willing to do your own show? And I said, I've been approached before. And so it wasn't exactly authentic for me, the way they wanted me to do it. And so I said, can I take the holidays to pray? This is a secular platform. And they said, sure. And they called me at the beginning of January, a year ago, and said, what would you say? And I said, I don't know what I can do for you. I'm not Martha Stewart. And, Martha, I just watched her Netflix show, by the way, and her whole statement is perfectly perfect. And it's interesting because mine for the last year has been perfectly imperfect. So I don't necessarily know I have something to offer if you can't do it perfectly, right? So they said, no, you're different than everyone else we have. We'll let you be authentically you. And they keep the prayers in, they keep everything in. It's been an amazing opportunity. So I'm just kind of seeing, but again, it's all God. I can't take credit for anything. So when you ask me 5 or 10 years from now, I don't know the answer. And, God's given me such amazing opportunities to speak around the country, several this year. So anytime I can be an encouragement to women and men, which is incredible.
Love what you have to share because it's for everybody. I just hate to.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I have to, I spoke at some men's events and men were like crying all over. And, because part of it is they think they have to be enough. And so my encouragement, I said, if you're courageous enough to pray that prayer, then be ready for the Lord to take you to places you're not enough. And that's a really hard place for a man to be, particularly, I think. So anytime I can encourage people on family or identity or a total faith walk, I'm there. Prayer, I'm there. So I don't know what it is in 5 or 10 years. That's the answer.
I think that's how God likes it to be, honestly. And that has definitely been the dominant theme in your life, for sure. Well, Ruth, as we get to the end of our episode, we always like to end with what we call our Manager's Minute. It's just a practical action our listeners can take to be better stewards themselves. So, Ruth, what would you leave our listeners with today?
I would say be courageous enough to pray that prayer. Ask the Lord for a vision beyond your resources and be willing to not be enough, because it will change your faith walk and it will more challenging than anything you've ever done.
And I think if just the people listening right now prayed that prayer, that there would be some incredible stories to follow. Ruth, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an incredible conversation. So excited for what God is doing in your life right now and for whatever he has planned over the next 5 or 10 years. So thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show. If you want to find any of our references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 132. Before we finish up, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever stopped to answer the question, how much is enough? A financial finish line is designed to help you do just that. Our 90-day Finish Line Pledge breaks down the process into 3 easy steps. Step 1, define how much is enough for your family to spend in a single month, and use that as your monthly spending budget for 90 days. Step 2, as God provides money to manage, set aside any margin outside of your finish line into a separate bank account. Step 3, after 90 days, explore the millions of ways you can use the margin you've set aside to create joy, purpose, and impact in God's kingdom. Want to learn more? Check out our website at finishlinepledge.com. That's it for today. We'll see you next time.